What causes PCOS? In this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS for short. Now, PCOS has been around for a very, very long time, and it's the most common hormone imbalance in menstruating women. And at the heart of this issue of PCOS lies a process called aromatization. And aromatization is basically the conversion of testosterone into estrogen by an enzyme called aromatase in the ovary. So your ovary produces testosterone and it produces aromatase. And anytime you see this ACE or ASE at the end of a word, that refers to an enzyme. So the aromatase takes the testosterone and converts it into estrogen, and that's called aromatization. And in PCOS, basically, we see a problem with this process. The aromatase enzyme is produced primarily in the granulosa cells of the ovaries. That's where it's produced. And these cells are often either producing less aromatase, or there's a problem with the aromatase enzyme, and that's really at the heart of this issue. And these cells, the granulosa cells, also respond very poorly to FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, which is a hormone that's released from the brain that signals to produce more aromatase enzyme. So now most of the estrogen that we produce is going to be produced for females in the ovaries, but there are receptors for it in the brain, the lungs, the intestinal system, the liver, and the fat cells, and so on. So there's aromatization happening at different parts of the body as well, not just the ovaries, but the bulk of it does happen in the ovaries. Now that we know that there's ineffective aromatization going on, we have a situation where we have low estrogen in the body. So the brain senses less estrogen, and then it signals to the ovaries that it needs to increase the production of testosterone and aromatase. So you have this almost unending cycle of an increase in testosterone for the body to try and get more estrogen produced, but ultimately, because of that process not being very effective, that estrogen level cannot really rise. So you end up with more and more higher levels of testosterone, higher levels of androgens, as we say, and you have a high LH as well, which is luteinizing hormone, another hormone released from the brain. So in women that get their blood work done who have PCOS, they often have estrogen levels at the lower end of the range, and androgen, which is testosterone and DHEA and things like that, at the higher end of the range, as well as usually high LH levels. So that's very characteristic in the blood. But at the heart of this process lies a problem with aromatization. Now, if we take this even further, what we'll find is that excess testosterone will actually be very damaging to the estrogen receptors. Okay, so on one hand, we're talking about low estrogen, and on the other hand, we're talking about a damage to the estrogen receptors. Remember, every hormone needs a receptor in order for it to work effectively. Those hormones will come into the receptor, and just like a lock and key, they will turn that receptor on to do its function. Now, when you have very high levels of testosterone, that can be damaging to those estrogen receptors. So the body already has low estrogen because of this process, and now the amount of estrogen it has, the receptors can't really utilize it very effectively. So essentially, the body is starved of estrogen for the most part. And even though we think of estrogen or estradiol as a quintessential female hormone, which it is, remember that estrogen has many, many functions all around the body. Amongst its functions are effects on the liver, there are brain estrogen receptors, there are intestinal estrogen receptors. So there can be systematic problems throughout due to this lack of estrogen and ineffective estrogen receptors. And that's what happens in PCOS, this kind of systematic issues all throughout the body. And then this leads to these cascade of symptoms that we'll talk about in a later video. So estrogen is very key in order to have, like I mentioned, good intestinal function, good brain function, and various other things as well. So when you take this, you basically have a situation in which the aromatization process has led to a lack of estrogen. Estrogen is also an inflammatory modulator as well. So poor estrogen is also going to increase inflammation as well. So this whole process leads to an increase in three things, essentially. Increase in inflammation, a hormone dysregulation, and increase in insulin as well. Okay, so all of that lies at the heart of PCOS. And at the end, I just want to talk about endocrine disruptors for a moment, because as I mentioned in this video, a big part of this issue is a lack of estrogen and poor estrogen function. Well, when you add on to that endocrine disruptors, which are basically toxic chemicals that mimic the effects of estrogen on the estrogen receptors, these can be things like bisphenol A, phthalates, dioxins, and things like that. They're commonly found in plastics. They're found in personal care products. They're found in certain foods. These endocrine disruptors can add insult to injury when it comes to PCOS, because you're already struggling with poor estrogen, you're already struggling with poor estrogen receptor function, and now you've got these endocrine disruptors to make matters even worse. So that's a little bit about the process of PCOS, the underlying mechanisms. So to summarize, at the heart of PCOS lies a process called aromatization, where there's ineffective conversion of testosterone into estrogen. This lack of estrogen then signals to the brain to increase the production of testosterone and LH, and that in turn continues this cycle of low estrogen, high androgens like testosterone, and the cascade of symptoms, ultimately leading to inflammation, insulin resistance, and hormone dysregulation throughout the body. So I hope this helps understand the underlying mechanisms behind PCOS a little bit better. If you have questions or comments, please leave them below. And I'd also love to hear your experience about or with PCOS if you are someone that suffers from PCOS.